Imagine a pit located within Butte spanning 1 mile across and dropping 1,700 feet down, holding 40 billion gallons of liquid so corrosive it eats right through solid steel. During 1995, 342 migrating snow geese touched down on this surface. Come sunrise, not a single bird survived. Sulfuric acid, arsenic, and copper had essentially dissolved their insides. Nobody bothered fixing the mess, seeing as the corporation responsible had vanished long ago. We aren't talking about some minor business either. At its peak, it stood as America's fourth biggest corporate powerhouse. They purchased the local press and had lawmakers in their pocket. Furthermore, they produced 25% of the conductive wire powering the entire nation. For almost 100 years, they managed a whole state exactly like their own personal empire. $300 billion worth of ore extracted from a solitary Montana mountain. The mastermind. A 15-year-old kid from Ireland landing in New York during 1856 completely empty-handed. Zero cash, zero schooling, and absolutely zero network. Meet Marcus Daly. The empire he forged, its rise to absolute dominance and its ultimate destruction, remains among the fiercest corporate sagas our country has ever witnessed. Chapter 1. The Irish Outsider. Rewind the clock to 1841. We are far from Montana or the States, starting instead within a tiny Irish settlement named Ballyjamesduff, located in County Cavan. Here marks the origin of Marcus Daly. Born on December 5th, he was the baby among 11 siblings. Losing his dad during childhood left him lacking any financial backup or family fortune. Furthermore, the kid never even saw the inside of a schoolhouse. Reaching age 15 meant hitting a dead end locally. Therefore, during 1856, he sailed solo toward the States, completely broke, lacking friends, and knowing just a fraction of the language. Touching down in the Big Apple, he was a total unknown. Those following years simply revolved around staying alive. Doing odd jobs across Manhattan, he shoveled manure and fed livestock for wealthy bosses who never bothered asking who he was. Taking the absolute worst gigs around turned him into a ghost. However, Daly wasn't merely doing manual labor. He paid close attention. Once 1861 rolled around, the 20-year-old heard rumors out west about regular guys finding gold and silver fortunes. Chasing those tales down to California, he took a subterranean job. Working as a mucker meant standing way down in the pitch-black tunnels, scooping up shattered debris right after the dynamite blew. It was deadly and claustrophobic, yet ideal for uncovering hidden truths. The guy lacked both formal education and professional mentoring. Instead, pure drive fueled him. He intensely analyzed tunnel surfaces, committing every hue to memory: metallic yellows, bluish grays, chalcocite, and chalcopyrite. Tracing damp spots near mineral deposits, he observed the ground's fracturing patterns, absorbing details his peers completely overlooked. Essentially, he constructed a mental blueprint unavailable at any university nationwide. Relocating to Nevada, he secured work at the Comstock Lode, America's highest-yielding silver strike. That spot allowed him to shadow elite industry veterans like John William McKay alongside James G. Fair. Transitioning from a lowly digger into a crew boss required zero paperwork or college credits, strictly hard-earned success. Moving into the late 1860s, he managed Utah-based projects under the Walker siblings. This brought sharper colleagues, heavier bankrolls, and crucially elite networking opportunities. During this journey, he crossed paths with George Hearst, plus heavyweights like James Ben Ali Hagen and Lloyd Tevis. These three influential tycoons sparked a massive turning point for him. Come 1876, they dispatched him on an ordinary assignment: check out a Butte, Montana silver site. Seemed like standard business until he physically set foot on the slope and froze, noticing emerald-colored lines cutting through the stone. Bluish-gray streaks peppered the exterior, subtle clues the average guy misses entirely. Yet having dedicated 20 years to reading the earth, he caught it immediately. Those Walker siblings purchased the site, promoted him to head supervisor, and tossed him a 1/5 ownership share. Officially, the deal seemed completely standard. However, Daly held on to a massive secret: that terrain wasn't actually hiding silver. It contained a totally different beast. Now that same immigrant who Doc completely broke stood on the verge of his biggest professional gamble yet. Chapter 2. Striking Gold. During 1881, Marcus Daly executed a move that appeared absolutely crazy to financial experts. Cashing out his $30,000 slice of the Les Dig, he took his entire net worth and dumped it straight into one dying property named Anaconda. Its previous owner was Michael Hickey, a fellow transplant from Ireland who had served during the Civil War. That moniker actually came from a journalist comparing Ulysses S. Grant's troops to a massive anaconda suffocating the Confederate forces. Hickey dug hard, yet finally hit a wall. Reaching a depth of 150 feet, his machinery just completely broke down. Flat broke, and unable to drill further, he unloaded it onto Daly, whose pockets were lined by George Hurst, James Ben Ali Hagan, and Lloyd Tevis. Their strategy uncomplicated. Extract more silver since the entire region was hunting it. Down in the darkness, though, a different treasure lurked. Butte rests directly above a gigantic granite batholith created almost 70 million years prior. Cooling caused the rock to fracture heavily. Boiling ore-heavy liquids surged into those crevices, stacking precious elements like a cake. Silver settled right near the top. Plunging further revealed a much steeper prize. Hitting 300 feet, Daly's squad blasted past the silver crust, altering history forever. They struck copper. We aren't talking a minor fleck or tiny cluster. This was a 100-foot thick motherlode jammed with raw, unrefined chalcopyrite, bornite, and energite. It ranked among the most massive finds of that era, yet his backers couldn't care less given copper only moved for 35 to 45 cents per pound back then. Michigan runs the trade. Montana sits leagues away from the factories. For those guys, this shifts absolutely zero things. Daly allows their chatter since he focuses on another era entirely. Back in 1879, Thomas Edison illuminates Manhattan avenues. By 1882, his Pearl Street plant starts pushing power into residences. Each cable within that setup relies on copper. All those connections, every grid and things are barely beginning. Communication cables, calling grids, whole towns getting fresh wiring, and everything depends on a single metal. Daly spots this ahead of the rest. Grow the entire enterprise. Dominate each phase from digging to refining to the final good. Make that happen, then you aren't merely rivaling Michigan. You absolutely crush them. His audience buys in. Afterward, Daly executes a far more crucial move. He stays completely silent. Zero press releases, zero front pages. He just sneaks around Butte Hill, purchasing territory single plot by single plot. A total bargain since no one grasps what lies below ground. Once folks figure it out, the whole game flips. When society finally understands Butte's true value, Daly possesses it all. That is not chance. It is 2 decades of digging, colliding with a tomorrow nobody else predicts. 1881 copper rates mean absolutely nothing. The crucial part is how the globe will soon transform. Part 3. Crafting the most massive engine out west. Marcus Daly secures the metal. Next, he must shape it into materials the nation genuinely needs. This procedure is incredibly complex. Taking unprocessed rock and turning it into finalized wiring takes half a dozen distinct phases. Every single phase demands specific gear, knowledge, and facilities. The majority of dig sites leaned on external firms for roughly half those tasks. Daly resolves to possess the entire chain. This is the general breakdown. Step 1, buoyancy. Rocks are smashed into dust blended with fluids in specific solutions, then hit with strong drafts. These specific metallic particles repel moisture. They grab onto froth and rise, worthless stone drops. You effectively split the prize from the garbage. Next comes the baking. The dense material heads inside an oven. High temperatures and air dismantle those sulfur elements. Cu2s shifts into an oxide state. The sulfur scorches away into gas. That batch becomes significantly cleaner. Step 3 involves melting. The heat spikes to roughly 1200 degrees Celsius inside a massive reflective hearth. The metal liquefies, splitting away from silica and iron rust to create liquid runoff. You are left with a matte hitting 35 to 45% purity. Phase 4 means transforming. That mixture gets dumped inside a modifying drum and struck with high-pressure gusts. Lingering elements simply roast and float away. The output is known as blister copper, hitting 97 to 98% pureness. Stage 5 is molding and purifying. This blistered metal takes the shape of 450-pound blocks traveling toward Great Falls, where electricity breaks them down to coat spotless cathode rods. Hitting 99.9% pureness, number 6 brings final goods like cables, panels, and tubes heading out to each United States town, powering up for the grid. Half a dozen moves, and Daly constructs each one. Come 1883, crews break ground on the original processing plant along Warm Springs Creek, 28 miles from Butte. Scholar Timothy Lean notes they didn't pick that gorge merely for river proximity. Butte was essentially suffocating under factory smog, making locals horribly ill. So Daly relocated the whole gig to a basin with a sparser population. Next to the plant, he erects a brand new community, Anaconda, Montana, featuring employee homes, classrooms, and chapels. A medical center in the Hearst Free Library. Daly grasped a concept other tycoons missed. A reliable workforce demands a dependable hometown. Soon the train bosses hike his fees. The Montana Union Railway demands prices Daly views as sheer robbery. His reaction is laying his private tracks. Thus comes the Butte, Anaconda, and Pacific Railway. 27 miles of rail completed by 1893. No one gets the upper hand on him again. Spanning 1891 through 1895, he wipes out any leftover reliance on outsiders. Big Blackfoot Milling Company handles the lumber. Kastner Coal and Coke supplies the energy. Tuttle Manufacturing covers the refining gear. He possesses every single connection. Once 1902 hits, the Washoe Reduction Works takes over the original site. A magnitude the western states had never witnessed. Half a dozen giant reflective ovens, modifying drums towering 60 feet high. Suspended hoists clocking in at 75 tons haul liquid metal over 600 feet of workspace all day. Later in 1918, they construct the chimney, the Washoe stack standing 585 feet up and 76 feet across the bottom, crafted purely from masonry. It remains the highest existing brick monument globally. Its main gig is launching emissions far up into the atmosphere to scatter. To cut down pollution, they put in an electric setup where magnetized metal links pull in arsenic-heavy powder before release. That rig catches 45%. Still 75 tons of toxic ash shoot out of that chimney daily. Not a single person solves the issue. No one needs to. By 1890, Butte's metal production reaches $17 million annually. Hitting 1892, the Anaconda operation turns into the absolute biggest metal supplier globally, defending that crown for 11 consecutive cycles. Butte, Montana, a town that practically wasn't there 2 decades prior, morphs into the most massive hub between Chicago and San Francisco. Locals dub it the wealthiest mound on the globe. People had a point. Chapter 4, the summit. The entire country completely upgraded its power grid, while a single corporation controlled a whole state from 1890 to 1920. I mean that in the most literal sense. Power cables were suddenly strung up overhead in all the big towns. Telecom grids blew up way quicker than anybody thought possible. Houses, transit systems, manufacturing, plants, and corporate hubs were all making the jump to electricity. Everyone desperately needed one specific material. Endless stretches of copper cabling, hundreds of thousands of miles really. Meanwhile, a solitary business out in Montana provided 25% of the total supply. The earliest flats to feature illuminated bulbs had Anaconda copper threaded inside their framing. That same metal pushed electricity into the initial wave of motorized trolleys. The initial telecom hubs were linked by it. Town after town, the very backbone of contemporary living in the nation, was slowly coming together. By the year 1900, a massive chunk of that electrical backbone was dragged right out of a single mound in Butte. That specific peak spawned an entire metropolis. By then, Butte, Montana boasted roughly 100,000 residents who conversed in no less than 30 distinct tongues. You had folks from Finland, Italy, Serbia, Germany, and China, with Irish immigrants anchoring the whole community. A solid 25% of Butte residents were either native to Ireland or first generation. Marcus Daly brought his fellow countrymen on board. The guy never forgot his roots. Back in 1895, a UK extraction specialist named Hamilton Smith released an evaluation that made the rounds through corporate suites all over the US and Europe. Nobody globally could churn out that much metal cheaper than Anaconda. Absolutely nobody. Naturally, having that much of an edge draws a whole new level of scrutiny. During 1899, Amalgamated Copper Company officially swallowed up Anaconda. It was a conglomerate financed by Henry Rogers and William Rockefeller, two guys heavily linked to Standard Oil. Suddenly, this went way beyond a simple excavation gig out west. We're talking about a countrywide stranglehold organized exactly like Rockefeller's petroleum empire. Fast forward to 1910, and every last competing firm in Butte was bought out. A full 100% of the state's excavation sector funneled into one corporate entity, and the metal was merely the beginning. Anaconda literally owned half a dozen of the most massive local publications. That included the Anaconda Standard, the Butte Miner, the Missoulian, the Helena Independent, the Billings Gazette, alongside the Great Falls Tribune. Those weren't merely financial ventures. The corporation used them as weapons to steer local government. Any articles putting the firm in a bad light got spiked. Lawmakers who dared to push back quickly faced ruthless media smear campaigns. Locals across the state coined a specific term for this chokehold, the copper collar. Dashiell Hammett, the guy who eventually penned the Maltese Falcon, actually took a gig as a Pinkerton investigator for the corporation back then. He laid out the situation perfectly. You could barely survive 6 months out there before having to pick a side. Either you backed the corporation or you fought them. Sitting on the fence simply wasn't an option. The guy wasn't blowing smoke either. Their growth rapidly spilled across state lines. By 1913, the conglomerate snapped up processing plants in Utah, Arizona, and New Jersey. Fast forward to 1923, they purchased Connecticut's American Brass Company, the absolute biggest manufacturer of its kind nationwide. At that point, they weren't solely pulling ore out of the dirt and cleaning it up. They produced the final consumer products. From the raw dirt all the way to the cables powering your house, they controlled the entire pipeline and pocketed every cent of profit. By the time 1926 rolled around, the business ranked number 4 among the biggest companies nationwide. However, Marcus Daly never lived to witness that peak. He passed away in New York City on November 12, 1900, at 58 years of age. He ultimately succumbed to health issues stemming from his heart and diabetes. The Butte miner published an obituary stating he clawed his way up from absolute dirt to massive wealth, calling him a genuine titan of industry. The thing that actually set him apart wasn't just the sheer size of his business. It was the decent way he handled his blue-collar crew. If a crew member lost his life on the job, the boss went straight to the widow's house himself. He actually pushed his employees to organize. He strictly hired union labor and personally reviewed candidate resumes. Through his whole run as head honcho, the workforce never staged a massive walkout. Absolutely zero. But all of that vanished the second he died. Standard Oil put John D. Ryan in charge, a highly competent, ruthless guy who cared strictly about the bottom line. All the goodwill and worker solidarity the founder spent 20 years cultivating was suddenly viewed as just another useless expense. The corporate-owned press turned into brutal attack dogs. The business shifted into a ruthless machine, preferring to completely destroy rivals instead of buying them out. The state's invisible leash grew way tighter. Folks didn't spot the shift immediately since the paychecks were still flowing. Output levels stayed sky high, and the monopoly just kept growing. However, the core principles were completely stripped away. People usually ignore underlying cracks until the whole house collapses. Chapter 5. The War of the Copper Kings. As the 1900s kicked off, the company had the entire state in a chokehold. Yet dominating a territory and maintaining peace without any pushback are completely different beasts. 3 specific individuals were gearing up to learn that the hard way. The initial challenger was William Andrews Clark, an attorney, financier, elected official, and Marcus Daly's absolute bitter rival. Clark was gunning for a spot in the United States Senate. His rival threw mountains of cash and massive media smears at him to kill the campaign. Naturally, the candidate retaliated. Their vicious feud drained both of their bank accounts and completely hijacked local government affairs for more than 10 years. Back in 1894, the corporate boss bankrolled an initiative to relocate the capital from Helena to his company town. The politician threw his weight behind Helena and scored the victory. Their beef carried on forever. Our next massive hazard is F. Augustus Heine, easily the deadliest rival they ever faced. Heine shows up in 1889. He doesn't own any digging sites, but he's incredibly smart with the law, eventually discovering a forgotten loophole known as the Apex Rule. This statute basically says if a mineral deposit peaks right above ground on your land, it entirely belongs to you, completely ignoring whether those minerals stretch deep into a neighboring plot. Originally, this legislation aimed to help out the little guys. Heine completely weaponizes this concept. After purchasing a tiny piece of land on Butte Hill, he brings in rock experts to track the deposits, constantly suing Anaconda by stating their copper is rightfully his. And he keeps coming out on top, mainly because he's been secretly getting the regional magistrates in his pocket. The massive corporation challenges him legally and fails, then tries their luck a second time, only to fail again. Using the justice system as his pickaxe, he essentially steals materials right from their hard work. In response, the company strikes back by disabling the drainage systems and completely submerging the contested areas. While this definitely damages Heine's operation, it wrecks their own business too. Fast forward to 1903, the company pulls a brazen stunt that no massive enterprise had ever dared to try. They pull the plug on the whole operation. Literally every single extraction site and processing plant across the state simply stops functioning by morning. Just like that, over 80% of the local workforce finds themselves completely without an income. Communities are left financially ruined, essentially holding the whole region for ransom while sending a very clear threat to the lawmakers. They demand a new piece of legislation that would let massive enterprises shift their legal battles away from regional courts. If the politicians refuse, this economic blackout becomes the new normal. The government folds passing the bill, and the corporation goes right back to work. By 1906, Heine takes a massive $10.5 million buyout and abandons Butte forever. However, the true price of this corporate victory is incredibly obvious now. A giant business literally starved a territory just to rewrite the rules, and absolutely no one had the power to prevent it. That grim reality sinks deep into the minds of every laborer in Butte. Then we hit June 8, 1917. Right around midnight, a supervisor heads down the granite mountain shaft holding nothing but a basic gas light. He drops 2,400 feet below the surface just to check on a busted power line. Because the wire is wrapped in highly flammable, greasy fabric, the open flame instantly catches, sending a massive blaze rushing up the tunnel as if it were a smokestack. Mere moments later, thick black clouds start billowing from the speculator site roughly 1/8 of a mile down the road, since the two locations are linked underground. Stopping the inferno is completely impossible. The deadly fumes choke out everything, rapidly flooding every single corridor and breathable space. Workers are forced to stumble through pitch blackness and poisonous gas only to hit locked escape routes that completely broke state regulations. 168 guys lose their lives. It remains the deadliest solid stone excavation tragedy this country has ever seen, holding that dark title even now. Later on, detectives discover the victims clustered right up against solid cement barriers, their fingers literally scraped down to the skeleton. They passed away frantically scratching at an illegal barricade. In protest, 14,000 workers immediately dropped their tools and strike. On July 18th, an IWW union leader named Frank Little hobbles into Butte with a fractured leg to spearhead the movement. He gives passionate speeches, sets up the protests, and loudly trashes the country's participation in World War I, which instantly puts a massive bullseye on his back. In the early hours of August, first half a dozen disguised guys yank him out of his rented room, hitch him up to a vehicle, and drag him down the streets south of Butte before stringing him up on a train bridge. They attach a final brutal threat to his shirt, stamped with the classic mob number 3777. 10,000 mourners show up for his burial service, marking the biggest memorial gathering the town of Butte had ever witnessed. His tombstone claims he was murdered by corporate greed for rallying his fellow workers. Shockingly, authorities never detain a single suspect. Crucial detective records completely disappear into thin air. Everyone points fingers at the company, but guilt is never established before the National Guard rolls in. Lawmakers quickly push through bills that crush free expression, causing the walkout to completely fall apart. The laborers return to the dirt, handing the corporation another massive victory. They didn't solve a single issue. They simply outlasted the outrage. The valuable metals continue to ship out, and the workers remain completely chained to the job. Chapter 6. The business expands worldwide. Chuquicamata. World War I wraps up in 1918, leaving the massive enterprise absolutely rolling in cash. The value of their products skyrocketed from 11 cents per pound to 36 cents, while the fighting lasted, effectively tripling their rates in just 4 years. The organization operated at absolute maximum speed, churning out electrical lines, bullet shells, and ship gear. Profits flooded the accounts way quicker than they could even spend it locally. So corporate leadership shifts their gaze way down south. Nestled up in the Atacama Desert of Chile is a remote spot known as Chuquicamata. Sitting roughly 9,000 feet in altitude, certain stretches of this barren landscape haven't seen a single drop of recorded rain in hundreds of years. It is incredibly arid, fractured, and completely white, but tucked right beneath that dead surface lies the most massive untapped source of valuable wiring metal on Earth. Let's break down the Earth science. This wasteland sits directly above the zone where a massive oceanic crust is violently smashing beneath the South American continent. This monumental crash literally forms the Andes mountain range, creating an absolutely insane amount of subterranean temperature and stress. All that force pushes pockets of molten rock up toward the surface. While chilling down, they bleed incredibly hot, nutrient-dense liquids straight into the adjacent stones. The valuable metals swimming in those liquids end up locked into something scientists refer to as a porphyry formation, scattering it throughout an enormous chunk of weaker stone that sits shallow enough to just dig a giant crater instead of boring deep tunnels. Even though the ore quality was on the lower end, running around 0.5 to 1%, the sheer size of the reserve made it an absolute goldmine financially. The Guggenheims had actually been running the extraction operation way back since 1915. They pulled 4,300 tons initially. Come 1920, they hit 50,000 tons annually. The mining world had never witnessed such explosive expansion. In 1923, Anaconda snaps up Chuquicamata for $77 million. That marked the absolute biggest acquisition in American mining history at the time. That move flipped the script entirely. Out in the barren wasteland, Anaconda constructed a massive corporate settlement, often nicknamed Chuqui. It featured employee housing, educational facilities, medical centers, a movie theater, athletic fields, its own train network, plus an independent electrical grid and fresh water pumped from hundreds of miles out. However, the town's layout painted a crystal-clear picture of the social pecking order. U.S. executives and technical staff occupied a premium subdivision featuring upscale homes, exclusive country clubs, and segregated restaurants. Meanwhile, the local Chilean laborers extracting ore from their native land were restricted to a completely separate district. They dealt with smaller paychecks and restricted amenities, a strict class divide literally paved into the streets. Eventually, people were bound to catch on to this rigged setup. Less than 10 years post-buyout, that single Chuquicamata site was pumping out 2/3 to 3/4 of Anaconda's entire worldwide earnings. They definitely weren't just some local business operating out of Montana anymore. They had transformed into a global powerhouse, leaning heavily on one massive pit for nearly everything. By 1926, Anaconda expanded again, snapping up the Giesche firm, a sprawling industrial setup over in Upper Silesia, Poland. Different hemisphere, identical playbook. Heading into 1929, Anaconda's shares skyrocketed to $175 apiece. That's when a company executives executed a classic market manipulation scheme. They loaded up on shares, hyped the valuation sky high, and cashed out at the absolute top. Share prices inevitably tanked, leaving everyday retail investors completely ruined. Shockingly, this was perfectly lawful back then. The Great Depression soon arrived to deliver the final knockout blow. The value of copper crashed to rock bottom, hitting levels unseen since 1894. Down in Chuquicamata, joblessness spiked to a staggering 66%. Come March 1931, Anaconda slashes dividends by 40%. That $175 stock crashes to just $4. John D. Ryan passed away in 1933 and was laid to rest in a solid copper casket. Ultimately, the outbreak of World War II rescued the struggling corporation. Modern combat absolutely depended on the metal for things like artillery shells, airplane electrical systems, communication devices, and submarine weaponry. Anaconda landed at number 58 nationwide for the sheer dollar amount of federal defense contracts. The Butte operations ran non-stop 24 hours a day until the fighting finally stopped. Once peace was declared, the market totally bottomed out once more. Moving into the early 1950s, those subterranean operations up in Butte were struggling hard. They spent 70 years stripping the absolute best ore. Costs skyrocketed while profits vanished. To counter this, Anaconda made two strategic plays in 1955. Step one was establishing Berkeley Pit, an enormous surface-level crater gouged out right over Butte. During its inaugural year, it yielded 17,000 daily tons at 75% purity. Surface excavation is incredibly cost-effective, rapid, and easy to expand. The massive crater slowly started devouring the eastern half of the town, completely wiping out entire residential blocks. Step two involved setting up a major aluminum processing facility up in Columbia Falls, Montana. They fueled the whole thing using the freshly built Hungry Horse Dam. Seeking a broader image, the corporation officially dropped the copper mining part of its title, rebranding simply as the Anaconda Company. They were now a multifaceted industrial giant rather than just a one-trick pony digging up copper. By 1956, they raked in a net revenue of $111.5 million. It marked their most lucrative financial year in three-quarters of a century. Come 1960, with 37,000 workers spanning North America and Chile, the corporate empire officially hit its ultimate peak. But there was an elephant in the room. The main cash cow, responsible for two-thirds of their earnings, was parked in a nation that had been a boiling political pressure cooker for 20 years. Plus, the local citizens were becoming incredibly hyper-aware of the vast natural wealth buried right under their feet. Chapter 7. Chile reclaims its riches. Throughout the late 1950s, a quiet momentum was gathering across the nation. It wasn't an overnight revolution, but a slow, undeniable shift. Think of it like tectonic stress slowly mounting just before an earthquake hits. Exporting this metal literally brought in 75% of the country's international trade revenue. It also bankrolled roughly 10 to 15% of the government's entire federal spending budget. The nation's whole financial foundation relied entirely on the ore extracted from Chuquicamata and a few sister sites. The catch, nearly every single dollar of that wealth was being shipped straight out of the country. Looking at the time frame spanning 1961 through 1969, the joint earnings of Anaconda and Kennecott, the two American firms running Chile's top mines, soared from $35.4 to $179.88 million, a five-fold leap in just 8 years. On the flip side, local labor paychecks barely ticked upward. Everyday life in those corporate-owned settlements only saw the most marginal of upgrades. The massive disconnect between the sheer value dug out of the earth and the scraps left behind locally just kept snowballing annually. 2 out of 3 contenders running for president in the 1964 Chilean race built their campaigns heavily around seizing state control of the mining industry. This wasn't some radical fringe idea anymore. It had officially become the dominant, universally agreed-upon political mindset sweeping the republic. Eduardo Frei ended up taking the presidency and attempted to walk a diplomatic tightrope, launching a policy he dubbed Chileanization. Under this plan, federal authorities purchased a 51% stake in Kennecott's local assets. Anaconda, however, dug their heels in, consenting to offload merely a 25% share. They insisted on maintaining absolute day-to-day management under U.S. supervision. Spoiler alert, that half measure wasn't going to cut it. It would never suffice. The most critical detail lies right here. Anaconda, alongside Kennecott, had both secured coverage against state takeover threats from OPIC, otherwise known as the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, an official United States federal bureau protecting domestic enterprises from foreign seizures. Both corporations acquired these policies before the close of the 1960s. These executives fully understood the danger, calculating the exact probabilities. Annual fees were handed over reliably, yet they avoided fixing the root problem, since abandoning such massive financial gains was completely out of the question. During December of 1970, Salvador Allende officially took office as Chile's president. His campaign guaranteed total state ownership. 0 half measures, absolutely no payout talks, and absolutely zero middle ground. Nobody was shocked by this, since his platform proudly broadcasted it. He secured the victory. By July 11, 1971, Joan A.Y. Saincy, lawmakers in Chile passed a massive constitutional change that handed federal leaders the power to seize every single mining asset nationwide. Everyone agreed without exception. Each individual sitting in the legislature, regardless of whether they leaned left, middle, or right, backed it completely without one objection. Hende declared the event a historic moment of nationwide pride. 5 days following that legislation, 17.450 became active. Chuquicamata fell under federal control. El Salvador suffered the identical fate without a single penny paid out. State officials determined Anaconda had been skimming unreasonable wealth for quite a while. These earnings far exceeded what anyone would deem fair for an outside corporation. Thanks to the newly minted legislation, those surplus gains were subtracted directly from their potential settlement. The final calculations landed at absolute zero, if not negative territory. Consequently, Anaconda walked away empty-handed regarding Chuquicamata. Before that 12-month period ended, Mexican authorities completely seized Minera de Ena, which functioned as an Anaconda extraction site within Sonora. President Luis Echevarria authorized the decree, leaving the company completely uncompensated yet again. Over a single 12-month span, Anaconda watched between two-thirds and three-quarters of their worldwide revenue vanish entirely. These losses did not happen slowly or in small chunks. They were erased within 1 year via mere signatures across a pair of disconnected continents. Anaconda immediately launched heavy legal retaliation. Lawsuits hit dockets throughout America and France. They even confiscated machinery that Chilean officials had acquired within United States borders. Absolutely nothing they tried managed to offset the sheer volume of stolen wealth. Prior to the 1970 race, Anaconda discreetly floated $500,000 toward federal agents to sabotage Allende's campaign. Washington rejected the cash entirely. Intelligence agencies independently executed secret sabotage campaigns against the Allende regime up until 1973. Come September 11th of that exact year, General Augusto Pinochet orchestrated an armed takeover. Explosives devastated the executive mansion, leaving Allende dead within its walls. Eventually, Pinochet's administration agreed to hand Anaconda a settlement exceeding $250 million. That sum fell short, not even remotely close. Once the funds finally materialized, the corporation had endured severe financial hemorrhaging for 24 straight months, crossing a threshold where one solitary check could not fix the devastation. Desperation drove them to auction off fundamental holdings merely to keep up with loan payments owed around Wall Street. Massive expanses of Montana forests alongside the Bonner lumber were dumped onto Champion International for absolutely rock-bottom figures. Properties gathered across generations vanished in weeks, yet the crisis raged on. Anaconda had previously gambled heavily upon a massive ore strike down south in Arizona, known as the Twin Buttes Project. It was Ferrari copper, much like Chuquicamata, except the actual material quality ranked significantly worse than their original forecast suggested. Overhead expenses skyrocketed past early estimates. The facility leaked capital, relentlessly occurring precisely when Anaconda desperately required every single cent just to stay afloat. Twin Buttes incinerated their remaining cash reserves entirely. This enterprise, which previously dominated as America's fourth-largest business titan, suddenly found itself begging for an acquisition. A century of brutal labor was instantly vaporized by one unified political decision. Yet the absolute darkest reality remained clear. Each politician sitting in those chambers understood precisely what destruction they were unleashing, and they unanimously approved it anyway. Chapter 8, Arco brings the finale. Back in 1968, roughnecks excavating Prudhoe Bay along the Alaskan North Slope struck black gold. This wasn't minor. It stood as the most massive petroleum reservoir ever unearthed across North America. Atlantic Richfield Company. Arco happened to be one of the dual entities that claimed this massive discovery. The crude rested untouched for 9 years, as crews constructed the Trans-Alaska Conduit over 800 miles of icy wasteland. By June 1977, the valves finally opened. Petroleum began flowing downward. Within hours, Arco transformed from a reasonably prosperous energy outfit into a powerhouse completely flooded with unprecedented wealth. Management frantically sought places to park this capital. Come January 12, 1977, Arco swallowed the Anaconda Company for $700 million. The underlying strategy, according to subsequent statements by Chief Executive Robert Orville Anderson, Anaconda brought specialized skills alongside massive territory that could launch an enormous Western shale energy enterprise. Petroleum trapped inside stone meant to be drawn out via intense temperature treatments and refinement. Anderson was convinced this represented the future. That dream completely died. A worldwide crude surplus suddenly emerged, causing market values to crash hard. The financial viability of shale operations imploded long before any industrial-scale production ever began. Suddenly, the whole justification for acquiring Anaconda completely evaporated. Arco found themselves holding the keys to a massive copper empire they possessed absolutely zero knowledge of managing. And this knowledge deficit was anything but small. When viewed from afar, extracting petroleum and excavating solid ore might seem identical. Each requires penetrating the ground, yet any resemblance completely vanishes past that point. Extracting solid minerals demands a drastically unique geological expertise. Deposits of sulfur-based minerals act entirely unlike underground oil reserves. The required machinery contrasts sharply, and the chemical refinement methods are totally unique. Overseeing subterranean tunnels descending thousands of feet through shattered stone demands generations of gathered expertise. Anaconda devoted 100 years to cultivating those specialized skills. That wisdom resides within technicians comprehending how Butte Hill reacts 3,000 feet below. It exists among labor teams navigating these exact tunnels just like their ancestors previously had. Such instinct cannot transfer during corporate acquisitions. Arco merely bought legal documents. All that practical insight simply vanishes. Concurrently, copper values keep plummeting, and worldwide consumption weakens following 1977. Codelco Chile's national enterprise currently managing Chuquicamata, the massive excavation originally established by Anaconda, operates seamlessly while distributing metals at rates that absolutely crush rival profit margins. Simultaneously, fresh extraction facilities launch throughout Zambia and southern Africa. The metal plummets to roughly 60 cents per pound by 1980, hitting a massive low. Arco reacts irreversibly. During 1980, they completely suspend subterranean extractions across Butte, and within that exact year, the Wo smelting plant Daly built during 1883, which grew into the Wo reduction complex by 1902, toppled by the Earth's tallest brick smokestack, in 1918 shuts down following almost 100 years of nonstop activity. 1,000 employees are instantly terminated. 25% of the labor pool in Anaconda, Montana finds themselves jobless by dawn. The community Daly established for his staff suffers a devastating strike it would never overcome. April 22, 1982 arrives. Arco kills the drainage machinery at the Kelly excavation 3,800 feet down. For decades, these systems operated without pause, constantly extracting subsurface fluid away from the tunnels and the Berkeley Pit. Once the machinery halts, moisture immediately starts flowing. Subterranean streams bleed through the broken stone, steadily flooding the subterranean passages. Following that, the liquid level climbs within the Berkeley Pit by 1 foot each month. Flowing across sulfur-heavy stones, the fluid absorbs iron, zinc, cadmium, arsenic, and copper. This specific chemical reaction would become massively important just a few years later. Eventually, during 1982, the Continental Pit ceases operations. Butte's final working site shut down, terminating 100 years of nonstop yielding within 5 years under leadership oblivious to their own acquisition. This collapse stems from issues far beyond market fluctuations. Excavation enterprises developed over multiple eras possess something financial experts call tacit knowledge. This isn't information found inside guidebooks. It exists within a supervisor intimately familiar with how a particular segment of Butte Hill reacts under immense pressure. It resides with the materials expert who thoroughly grasps how this mineral mixture reacts under extreme furnace heat. It thrives in the connection uniting laborers with the stone their ancestors mined. Tacit wisdom simply cannot be purchased. It never shifts owners. Furthermore, Arco commits a massive tactical error that literally any veteran extraction manager would spot. As values plunge, they shut everything down totally instead of merely scaling back production while anticipating an eventual market rebound. Copper values consistently move in waves. Any corporation weathering the Great Depression and 2 global conflicts understands this reality. Arco remains clueless, treating a temporary market slump like a fatal disease and finalizing a permanent choice. Furthermore, absolutely no ecological departure strategy exists once Arco powers down the drainage systems. They lack any blueprint for the gathering, fluid possess zero purification plants, and completely lack observation guidelines. Nobody prepared for the 40 billion gallons of highly acidic, metal-heavy liquid steadily consuming the massive crater they carelessly abandoned. This massive burden is simply passed along. During the year 2000, British Petroleum purchases Arco strictly to obtain their Alaskan petroleum reserves. Hidden beneath the financial paperwork lies total legal accountability for every single action Anaconda inflicted upon the soil under Butte, the community of Anaconda, and the Clark Fork River. An English oil corporation unexpectedly inherits full responsibility regarding the historical aftermath of a 19th century Irish immigrant's massive metal dynasty. Marcus Daly initially landed in America completely penniless back in 1856. 144 years down the line, his massive tab remains covered by entities totally unfamiliar with his name. Chapter 9, The Poisonous Legacy. The drainage equipment shuts down during 1982, unleashing the rising floods. Subterranean fluid breaches the underground sites initially by bleeding through fractured stone, invading thousands of feet of passageways maintained perfectly dry through years of nonstop extraction. Afterward, the floodwaters start elevating within the Berkeley Pit proper at 1 foot each month, relentless and completely unavoidable. Stretching 1 mile in length, a half-mile across, and descending 1,700 feet, the crater currently contains upward of 40 billion gallons of liquid. However, this fluid is absolutely nothing like traditional water. Its pH level hovers from 4.1 to 4.5, basically matching the tartness of tomatoes or beer. Laced with concentrated sulfuric acid alongside dissolved iron, zinc, cadmium, arsenic, and copper, the mixture obliterates organic matter upon touch. The lake's surface looks rusty brown as iron hydroxide physically separates. Plunging further down, the hue shifts into a vivid teal color, heavily concentrated copper sulfate, visually stunning from afar yet totally deadly up close. This is the exact science explaining it. The stone framing the crater holds abundant pyrite or iron sulfide, chemically written as FeS2. This mineral automatically rusts whenever it contacts moisture in air. Yet a specific microbe named Acidithiobacillus ferrooxidans thrives in low pH conditions, accelerating this rusting effect way beyond the speed of a standard chemical reaction. These microbes systematically rust the iron found within the pyrite, creating sulfuric acid that pulls additional heavy metals from nearby stones, making the liquid even more highly acidic. It becomes a continuous feedback loop. The whole reaction keeps going without any people needing to step in. You completely lose the ability to stop it. This toxic runoff keeps flowing endlessly, provided the crater contains raw sulfide stone, air, and moisture. Back in 1995, 342 snow geese touched down on the Berkeley Pit while heading south. When sunrise came, not a single bird was left alive. Autopsies revealed that the delicate tissues coating their oral cavities, windpipes, and bellies suffered severe chemical corrosion. Their internal organs completely shut down while trying to process the heavy metals ingested from the liquid. Later, around 4,000 geese took shelter there during a 2016 storm. The exact same tragedy happened. The surface appears just like a regular pond, and wildlife obviously cannot comprehend toxic hazards. This pollution reaches much further than the crater alone. During 1980, federal regulators declared Anaconda and the Upper Clark Fork River Basin a Superfund area spanning over 200 square miles or 518 square kilometers. It ranks as the absolute biggest and costliest Superfund cleanup project ever undertaken in the United States. Complete ecological restoration carries an estimated price tag hovering right around $900 million. 140 miles of the Clark Fork River suffer from severe heavy metal pollution caused by mining runoff. For decades, industrial operations basically abandoned their processed mineral garbage right next to vital stream beds. Whenever storms wash over these mounds, they drag arsenic, copper, cadmium, and lead straight into Silverbow Creek, eventually feeding the Clark Fork. Consequently, local trout communities upstream were entirely wiped out. If we just let nature take its course without any hands-on help, healing would require centuries, maybe even millennia. BP, having bought Arco back in the year 2000 and taking on its legal baggage, remains the main group regulators hold accountable for footing the bill. Approaching 2026, BP shelled out over $250 million toward environmental repair. That effort is ongoing with no clear finish line for Anaconda. The earth surrounding the old WOO processing plant stays completely restricted to everyday citizens. Dirt in the area holds enough concentrated arsenic to create incredibly serious medical dangers. Federal authorities continually advise local families to get kids under 7 checked yearly for toxic blood levels within these zones. That giant WOO chimney faced planned destruction after the facility shut down. However, Anaconda locals flatly refused to let it happen, banding together instead. Residents gathered petitions and aggressively pressured local lawmakers. Consequently, by 1986, that 585-foot brick pillar officially became the Anaconda Smokestack State Park. It remains upright right now, easily spotted from miles away across the entire basin. However, stepping anywhere near its foundation is strictly forbidden. Ground conditions there remain incredibly toxic. Meanwhile, the Berkeley Pit transformed into a sightseeing spot, charging $2 for entry. There is an observation deck hovering over the edge. Every year, massive crowds lean against those barricades staring deeply at a scene that actually looks pretty gorgeous from so far up. Those rusty crimson waters blending smoothly into vibrant teal, alongside those massive stepped cliffs carved out by ancient equipment that is long gone. Information boards scattered around the deck break down the backstory. These placards casually mention, almost in passing, how authorities have to aggressively control the rising liquid. Government regulators and Montana Resources run heavy-duty pumps in a filtration plant to ensure the crater stays beneath what experts term the danger threshold. Should the surface breach that specific height, it would spill directly into the surrounding underground aquifers. Toxic sludge would breach the subterranean freshwater reserves, ultimately forcing an entire city to pack up and leave. Those machines have to operate 24/7, basically forever. Over at the original Anaconda industrial grounds where Marcus Daly constructed his initial refinery back in 1883 sits a premier golf course drafted by Jack Nicklaus. Its bunkers are packed with pitch black slag, a jagged glass-like byproduct left over from 100 years of copper processing. Players actively swing their clubs right out of the stuff. Yet directly beneath those pristine fairways, putting greens and perfectly manicured lawns, the earth stays thoroughly poisoned. That surface-level makeover is completely genuine, but the toxic reality buried below is equally true. Just one last detail: researchers from Montana Tech spent decades examining the liquid inside the Berkeley Pit. Down in that highly acidic, chemically lethal stew, they discovered living things. They found extremophile microbes uniquely adapted to thrive in a harsh environment that would instantly kill pretty much any other biological organism on the planet. Various chemicals generated by these tiny life forms are already showing initial promise for fighting specific types of cancer cells and aggressively stubborn bacterial infections. The single most heavily polluted manufacturing zone throughout the United States could actually hold the foundational ingredients for tomorrow's medical breakthroughs. 100 years of toxic waste somehow generating elements that could save lives. Not a single person engineered things to end up like this. As it turns out, people rarely think ahead about the massive messes they inevitably abandon. Chapter 10. 6 Key Takeaways from a $300 billion Dynasty. 6 Lessons Pulled from 100 Years of Copper. Lesson 1. Counting heavily on one asset slowly digs a grave. The Chuquicamata site produced 2/3 to 3/4 of all worldwide earnings for Anaconda. It powered their entire operation. The corporation fully understood this danger. Internal audits warned them, prompting the purchase of OPIC coverage against government takeovers. They handed over yearly premiums, but kept their business model unchanged since the incoming cash was simply irresistible. After Chile seized control in 1971, the corporation lacked a safety net. A single political decision 9,000 miles distant completely wrecked their finances. Any business tying its future to one asset essentially builds its very own Chuquicamata time bomb. Year after year, Anaconda willingly gambled with that danger until their choices became irrelevant. Lesson 2. International properties are political wagers. The corporation never lost Chuquicamata due to bad management. Their downfall happened simply because foreign politicians cast a unanimous ballot to seize the property. Properties located overseas remain yours solely through the goodwill of local ruling authorities. Global regulations carry weight, but they fold entirely under intense political pressure. Anaconda clearly saw the warning signs. Internal teams tracked the escalating threat of government seizure throughout the late 1960s. Consequently, they secured coverage. They realized that merely recognizing a danger doesn't equal actual safety. Takeaway number 3. Purchasing property is possible, but buying the expertise to operate it isn't. Arco spent $700 million buying Anaconda. They solely acquired legal deeds for excavation sites and machinery. They couldn't inherit 100 years of specialized stone excavation expertise. All that wisdom resided deeply within experts who comprehended Butte Hill from 30,000 feet up. It stayed with families digging those exact rock formations. Following Arco's acquisition, those crucial workers walked away. Years of collective wisdom vanished. Only physical sites stuck around, completely lacking the skilled hands required for functioning. Purchasing an excavation site is simple. Buying the talent required to manage it is impossible. Takeaway number 4 shows that buying into identical dangers is completely pointless. In 1955, Anaconda expanded into aluminum and coal. Each fresh venture remained rooted firmly in raw material harvesting. Their success always fluctuated alongside worldwide market needs. Whenever extreme economic stress strikes, these mirrored industries crash simultaneously. Once property seizures and dropping copper values hit together, every branch of their portfolio bled cash. Their diversification strategy appeared solid. It ultimately collapsed. Lesson number 5. Having total dominance obliterates any ability to fix internal mistakes. By the 1920s, Anaconda dominated local newspapers, commanded state politicians, and steered the entire economy. No independent organization possessed enough freedom to actively fight back. 168 workers perished at the speculator site in 1917 simply because hazard regulations were ignored under a regime lacking any true oversight. Those blocked escape routes that doomed the workers existed solely because external regulators lacked the teeth to enforce corrections. Total dominance doesn't make a corporation bulletproof. It makes them completely blind. Lesson 6. The real cost of earthly extraction never simply vanishes. It gets passed to future generations. The Berkeley Pit has steadily accumulated toxic fluid daily since 1982. Massive filtration machines operate nonstop indefinitely just to prevent those hazardous liquids from contaminating the local tap water in Butte. They made absolutely zero preparations for this scenario when locking up. 100 years of digging created disastrous environmental ripples that will outlive the corporation by centuries. Their lucrative financial spreadsheets completely ignored the massive ecological toll. Those hidden expenses were simply deferred until they became a burden for citizens completely disconnected from the original choices. A penniless 15-year-old boy leaves Ireland in 1856. He learns geology, then wagers $30,000 on a Montana dirt pit. He uncovers the metal electrifying America. Building a $300 billion legacy, he dies at 58. Now in 2026, heavy machinery operates constantly underneath Butte, blocking 40 billion gallons of toxic sludge from destroying the town his success built, the wealthiest mountain globally. Endlessly providing yet continuously destroying.